Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Synced Up Designs Beyond the Basics. In this series, we're going to be teaching you all the in-betweens you need to know about color guard, whether that be how to tape your equipment, what to pack in a show bag, or how to prepare for a rehearsal. Essentially, you're going to be learning all of the things you need to know prior to getting on the field to perform. In today's video, we're going to be learning how to tape our flag, which is a common knowledge essential skill that everyone in color guard should be able to do. Knowing this skill is going to help make sure that you are maintaining the longevity of your equipment as you're spinning through your season. And as always, please make sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as it's always super helpful to us to get more content out to you. And then also make sure to hit that bell icon so you can stay up to date with anything we post in the future. And with that taken care of, let's learn how to tape our flag. So before we get into the details on how to tape a flag, I first want to go over the materials that you're going to need for it. First and foremost, you're going to need a pole. The typical length for a flag pole is going to be 6 feet. There are other lengths out there, but the most commonly spun length is going to be a 6 feet aluminum pole. Along with that, you're also going to want a flag silk. Typically, it's about 3 feet of the pole length and about 3 to 4 feet of tail. Along with that, you will need 2 crutch tips, 1 for each end of the pole, and 2 bolts, also 1 for each end of the pole. The lengths of the bolts are going to vary, but typically you'll see one that is short and one that is long, and the most common I personally see is going to be one that is 2 inches long and one that's 3 inches long. Along with all of that, you're also going to want electrical tape. Color is going to be up to your preference, depending on if you're taping a practice flag or a show silk, but a roll of white tape and a roll of black tape is always a good choice to go by. You're gonna need a measuring tape as well, and I'll go over in detail in a little bit why we're gonna be using that. And then an optional material will be a pair of scissors. When it comes to electrical tape, it's super easy to rip, so you're able to do that on your own. But if you wanna have cleaner lines when it comes to your taping, you can use a pair of scissors to cut up the tape. And that'll be all the materials you need for taping a flag. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna tape our reference tapes onto the pole, which are those cheater spotter tapes that we use. It's gonna go on the section of the pole that doesn't have the silk. When it comes to finding where those cheater points are, we're gonna measure them out on the pole. But first, just to kind of visualize this, we have a 6 foot long pole. If we were to divide that in half, we would have 3 feet on one end. And then if we were to divide that into thirds, which is where each of those tapes will go, that is going to be 1 foot each in between. So we're gonna go to one end of the pole. We're gonna grab that measuring tape that we picked up earlier, and we're gonna measure out 1 foot from the end of the pole into the pole. So we're gonna take our measuring tape here, go to the very edge of the pole, measure out 12 inches or 1 foot, and then find that point on the pole. That's where our first tape is gonna go. So we're gonna take whichever color we'd like. If this is a practice pole, you can use white tape on a black pole so you can see it. Or if it's a performance pole, maybe you'll use tape that matches the color of the pole. Again, that's really up to preference, but we'll take a piece of tape and we're just gonna mark it on that spot where we found that reference point. You don't have to use a lot of tape. This really just has to be enough for you to see it and enough for the performer to be able to feel it whenever they're spinning the pole. Maybe 2 wraparounds at best. Once you have that, you can peel it off. And then from there, you can start at your first tape and then measure 12 more inches from there to get to your second spotter tape, which will be 12 inches down. We then grab our tape from there, place it onto the part of the pole that we found that spot 12 inches down. And then that's when we'll have both of our spotter tapes. So again, we're just starting at the end of the pole, going 12 inches down to our first tape, 12 more inches down to our second tape. And you'll see later in the video, if you do 12 more inches after that, that's where our tab is gonna go, or the middle point of the flag is gonna be. So this will be our 2 reference tapes. You also have the opportunity to do 2 reference tapes on the other side of the pole. But one thing I'd recommend with that is knowing that the silk is gonna cover it. So you wanna make those tapes a little bit thicker so you can feel them underneath the silk. And then also for reference of the things that we'll be taping in the future, you also wanna make sure that you remember which of your tapes are on which side of the pole. So this is gonna be the side of the pole that doesn't have the silk, and this one will have the silk, so I need to make sure I remember that for when I'm taping my weights in a little bit later. So now that we've finished taping our reference tapes onto the pole, we're actually going to set this off to the side and move on to taping our bolts. When it comes to taping the bolts, before you can put it into the actual flagpole, you want to give it some padding tape with the electrical tape to make sure that when you are spinning the flag, it's not rattling on the inside of the aluminum pole and making a lot of extra noise. Essentially what you'll do is you'll take whatever color tape you want and you're going to wrap fully around the base or the stem of the bolt, once going up, once going down, and then a couple extra layers on the very end of it to make sure that when it's in the pole and if it rattles, it's going to be padding up against the electrical tape and it'll be a softer sound, so you won't be hearing it. So again, one layer down, go back up, and then a couple extra layers on top. And here are our bolts taped. Like I said, you'll be essentially covering the entire base of it with tape and then giving a little extra padding at the very end of it. This doesn't have to be a pretty tape job. Again, you're not gonna see it. So just make sure that you're covering all the metal pieces as we go through, so that way when it's in the pole, it doesn't rattle. So now that we have our bolts taped, we're gonna go and grab our pole and learn how to tape the bolts into the pole. When it comes to knowing which bolt goes onto which side, you need to remember which side of the pole you've decided that the silk is gonna go on. So we taped our reference tapes onto the pole earlier, so this will be the side that doesn't have the silk, and this will be the side that does. Wherever the silk is going to be, that is where the longer bolt will go. Wherever the silk isn't, that's where the shorter bolt goes. So just make sure that you know which side of the pole you've established that, and when you do tape these bolts in, make sure that you remember that. Another way to kind of remind yourself as you're going through the tape process is the side with the reference tapes will be the side that has the lighter bolt. But also remember, if you did other reference tapes, it's going to be a little bit harder to remember. So just make sure that you're keeping track of that as you go through the process. When it comes to taping the bolt into the pole, you're going to take your bolt, you're going to place it in like so. The first few tapes you're gonna put on are gonna be a X shape over the top of the pole and then over the top of the bolts. And then once you have that X shape on top, you're gonna wrap around a couple times to ensure that it's nice and locked in place. And now that I have taped my bolts securely into the pole and they have the padding on them as well, they should not make a sound whenever I go through or shake the pole or do any sort of spinning. The tape job for these does not have to look pretty. Again, it's gonna be covered by a crutch tip eventually, so it really doesn't matter what this looks like. So again, just really trying to focus on creating that X shape over top of the bolts to put it onto the pole and then wrapping around the ends of that X to make sure that it's nice and secure into the pole. So the next thing we're gonna do is learn how to put our silk onto the pole. You wanna do this prior to putting your crutch tips on, just so it's a little bit easier to slip the silk onto the pole itself without having to deal with this bulky thing at the end of it. When it comes to different cuts of the silk, sometimes you have silks that are just regular rectangles and sometimes you have others that are different shapes. When it comes to those who have different shapes, you wanna make sure you put them on correctly and not upside down. So if you look at this silk right here, it has a little bit of curvature going downwards. I wanna make sure that that curvature going down is the part of the flag that actually goes down. I don't want to put it on upside down where when I'm holding it up, it looks like this in the air. So we want to find where that curvature goes down and then find the corresponding end of the pillowcase, and then that side goes into the pole first. Some silks will have little icons on the base of the pillowcase depending on where you get them from, and that'll help you also decide where the tab of the silk will be. So I'll go to the top of the flag pole. I'll slide that silk on all the way down, and then just do one quick little double check and make sure that the curvature is going downward. And then that's how we know that we put the silk on correctly. So now that we have the silk on the pole, we're gonna go into taping the top crutch tip as well as the top of the silk onto the pole. When it comes to putting the crutch tip on, some flags will have these extra little pieces of fabric inside the pillowcase, kind of like little tags in them. If you have one of those, I would recommend taking it and wrapping it over top the end of the pole before putting the crutch tip on top. That'll just help ensure that the parts of the flag are really secure on there. If you don't have that, that's okay. We're gonna learn a tape that's gonna help really anchor it down. But if you do, I would go ahead and do that before putting the crutch tip on. I don't have that on my silk, so I'm gonna go ahead and just place my crutch tip on top of the pole and press it in like so. Once I have the crutch tip on, I'm gonna take the silk up to the edge of the crutch tip, and I'm gonna tape it on as well as the crutch tip when I go through the taping process. When I'm doing these next few steps of taping, we're gonna do something called an anchor. And essentially what an anchor is, it's an extra piece of tape that'll help really secure the wrapping that you do over top of it to make sure that nothing is really moving underneath. It looks like this little ribbon shape that starts on the base of where you're taping, wraps around the top, and then goes back down. And then once you have it back down, you'll just wrap from the bottom to the top, and that'll help really anchor that tape back in. So when it comes to taping the top crutch tip and the silk onto the top of the pole, the first step I'm gonna do is cover the very top of the crutch tip itself. How I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna take 2 pieces of tape, whichever color I want to use, depending on the color overall that I'm going for. And I'm just gonna lay them on top of the pole next to each other, or sorry, on top of the crutch tip next to each other. So we're covering up all of that rubber bit of the crutch tip itself. You don't need any more than just these 2 pieces, and they don't need to be very long, just enough to cover the very top. When we do our wraparound later, that's when we'll cover the rest of the crutch tip, but we need to get that top section first. After we've done that, we are then going to do our anchor tape followed by our wraparound tape at the very top. The anchor is actually gonna be on both the silk and the crutch tip, so we're gonna start the anchor on the top of the silk, wrap it up to the top of the crutch tip, go back down to the base of the silk, and then we'll do our wraparounds all the way back up to the top until we cover all of the rubber bits of the crutch tip. When we do this, notice how I'm pinching the pillowcase here as I do so. When I do my wraparound, I wanna make sure that I'm pinching that and I really close off that pillowcase as I tape it to make sure that I'm not letting air get into the pillowcase over time when I go to spin. So we just really wanna close that off and make sure that we don't have anything going through that. And there we have our taped top crutch tip. And if you give a little pull on the silk, you'll notice that it's not really going anywhere. And it's really because of that anchor underneath before we do the wraparound that's really holding everything into place. I also have this bit pinched off, so there's really nothing getting through that at any point. After we've done the top crutch tip, we're gonna move down to the tab of the silk, which is gonna be where it meets the pole. This process is gonna be the exact same. We're gonna start with an anchor at the base of the tab, go down into the pole, and then wrap back around as we go through. But one thing you wanna make sure you do before you start taping is, one, you wanna pull tight on the silk to make sure that there's no slack in the pillowcase. If I let go and I taped it right here, for example, 1, this would happen in the silk as I'm spinning, and 2, the distance from the tab to the tape wouldn't be consistent. So we just want to make sure that we make it nice and tight, and that we also want to make sure that the seam of the pillowcase is all on one side. We don't want this twisting around the pole like so before we tape, because then that's going to be super awkward to spin. So just make sure that the pillowcase is tight and the seam is all on one side, and then you can go through with your anchor and wrap around. And you can also give a little pull on this side to make sure that it's nice and snug. When I did this, I also did that same pinch method to make sure that I'm really closing off the pillowcase when I go into tape. And then I'm also not using a lot of tape itself for the tab. It really does not require that much to make sure that you're trying to keep from using too much. It really does the job with just a little bit. And then lastly, we just have to tape the bottom crutch tip on, which is going to be the exact same process as the top crutch tip, except you don't have the silk to worry about. So you'll put your crutch tip on, you'll do the 2 tapes on top, followed by your anchor and your wraparound to finish off the taping process. And just a little tip, if you notice that the top of the crutch tip isn't fully covered by the 2 pieces of tape that you put on after you've done your wraparound, you can overlap that wraparound tape like I just did, and then press all of it down to give just a little bit of extra coverage if needed. If you've already covered it, then you don't need to do the step, but that is a quick little fix if you don't want to have to go back and retape it. And then once you have that done, you have fully taped your flag. And then once you have finished taping your flag, there is an optional step for anyone who is a part of a group, whether that be a school or an independent organization or really anything in between. And that step is going to be labeling your equipment. When it comes to labeling, I would recommend either putting your initials at the very bottom of the bottom crutch tip or at the very top of the top crutch tip, not on the sides because you don't want that label to be seen. What you would do is if you have black electrical tape, use a silver Sharpie or put a piece of white electrical tape on top so that way you can put your initials, or if you just have regular white electrical tape at the crutch tips, you can just write over it. But you'll just get yourself prepped either with a piece of tape or a silver Sharpie, grab your writing utensil, and then just write your initials at the very bottom like so. That way, whenever the equipment is in a stack of other equipment that looks like it, you can find your name super easily, but then also whenever you're spinning this equipment, you're not gonna be able to see this as an audience member. So that's another optional step that you can do if you would like to, again, for those who are part of an ensemble. And that is going to be our video on how to tape a flag. This is a very simple and straightforward process, super easy to learn, and the more you do it, the faster you'll get and the better you'll get at it over time. Anyways, if you found this video helpful in any way, please consider liking, and if you have any questions at all, feel free to leave that down in the comment section below. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next one, and happy spinning.